Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Kardec Radio. We are here at another What is Spiritism program. And it's a journey, and we are going on this journey with Kardec. Yes, Kardec published this book in 1859. And in the prologue of the book, he tells us that this book is not only for beginners of Spiritism, those that have questions and want to get started. It's a way to provide a concise summary of what is Spiritism. But he says this book is also for all those who already know about Spiritism, but we'll encounter those that don't, and we'll have conversations similar what Kardec reports in the book. Those that might be skeptical, those that might be coming with criticism to Spiritism, or those who are curious, they just want to know more. And Kardec, in a very concise way, like a great educator that he is, he brings us this very short book, but very deep. There's much more for us to talk about, but I have friends here with me because we do this in a teamwork effort. So we are here together, and I will call our friends. We have first our dear friend Theresa Castro. She is joining us from Vermont, right, Theresa? How are you?
Yeah, welcome. Thank you so much, Daisy. I'm well, and I'm looking forward to our discussion tonight. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity. So, a big thank you to Kardec Radio. I do live in Vermont. And I have been studying Spiritism for about 9 years now, and still feeling highly motivated. There's always so much more to learn.
There's so much to learn, right, Theresa? And you're also a host here at Kardec Radio, and you host the Prayer for Peace program on Sundays, right?
That's right, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join us. There's a prayer every day at 6 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yes, prayer is so important. Well, thanks for being here with us, Theresa, right from Vermont. And then we're gonna now travel to Texas, and we're gonna ask our dear Norah, Brazil, to join us. Hello, Norah. How are you?
I'm well, always here in South Texas. It was we had a really hot day today, over the 100, so it was a beautiful day. Definitely puts into perspective. So I also like Teresa, want to thank first God, right? But also Cardiac Radio and yourself and all of y'all for this amazing and beautiful opportunity to study together, because like you said, it's small, but there's just so much. So really looking forward to it. I've studied Spiritism for a really long time. I want to say close to 20 years now. It's been a while, and it's beautiful because I'm not around a center, but thank God for technology and Cardiac Radio to be able to continue with this. So thank you.
Yes, thanks to technology, right, Nora? We are in each at different corners of the US, but we feel so close and connected. And you also have a program, right, Nora, at Kardec Radio on
Yes.
Thursdays evenings, right?
As a matter of fact, yes, it's Thursdays. We just bumped it down to after this program. So it's a night program in case the audience prefers something at night. I know I love to watch something at night before going to bed. So that's Cardiac Radio providing different options for us, which is beautiful, right? So thank you.
Yes,
Thanks.
for sure. And as you both said, there's so much for us to learn, right? We're on this journey learning with Kardec. And today we are continuing on chapter 2, where Kardec's having this conversation with the skeptic. And today there are two parts of this chapter that we're gonna discuss it and learn together is the powerlessness of the detractors, so those who criticize Spiritism, and then the extraordinary supernatural. And as you said, Norah, they Kardec, it's in few words, but it is so deep, right? So tell us, and we'll start with you, Norah. Tell us one of the highlights. I know there are many, right, that we can point it out, but as you were reading these parts of chapter 2, what kind of spoke to your heart as you were thinking about it and reading?
I think in all of this, it was really that spiritual source that we're getting, combining. This chapter does start in explaining how, in Spiritism, we have the intellectual integrated, right? Um, but also that it cannot be stopped because even that opposition has a purpose. So something that is so beautiful from that was that this is a spiritual source, and I wrote this down so that I don't go off track. But let's call it the decentralization, right, of allowing this communication with the spirits to reinforce the authenticity. I think that we learned through Spiritism, and it really, I brought this up because it reminded me, at least, and I want to share with you all, of Jesus' time. We know that he was that role model for us of decentralizing, right, that religious aspect and sort of opening up that pathway that us now as the apostles, because even the apostles at that time were taking that role. And it's so beautiful for us today, right? Because we can be passing on these messages, kind of how we are doing this, and to also think of it in terms of the diversity of the spiritual gifts that we learn through here, because this beautiful chapter has so many messages for us, a lot of reasoning, but even within that, right, the science, it's very creative too. So yes, there's logic, there's creativity, and there's all of this together. But it's not about, there's a leader and telling us what to do. It's about following our heart and looking as Jesus as our role model. And that perspective for me was like, wow, it was really, truly an eye opener as I was reading this, because I do, prior to Spiritism, having that foundation in religion, I grew up in a church, right? Here in the US, we don't grow up with Spiritism. So it's always good to use what we have right in our background, we can say, knowing that Jesus and seeing how even that in itself can be beautifully transformed into who we are today. And that was one of my highlights from this chapter. Thank you.
That's that's wonderful, Norah. And as you put it so well, Jesus is our guide and model. But Kardec says, right, people think that if they destroy one person, right, as he's talking about this detractors, they think, oh, if I get this person out, spiritism will die. And that's what you're saying, right? It's not about us as a person. It's about spiritism as a science, as Kardec puts so well, that needs to be studied, right? That it's also a philosophy because of its moral aspects. So spiritism, it will never die because it's part of nature, is a law of nature that, as Kardec says,
For
right?
sure.
Which you put it so well. How about you, Theresa? Is there a particular part that spoke to you as you were reading this chapter?
Yes. As always, I'm always very touched by Spiritism, and I always get these aha moments. And I think what it brought up in me was the Spirits book. And it's in questions, the 700s, it's like 778 and 781, where Kardec asked the spirits about the law of progress. And the spirits tell us that one thing is humankind never regresses. So the idea that one person or a group of people who don't like Spiritism or who think it's sorcery or charlatanism or witchcraft is not going to be able to stop it. And they also tell us that, however, humankind can slow down progress, but they can never stop it. And so we can create obstacles, which of course we will be responsible for. We're responsible for all our actions. And I have to say, in all honesty, I couldn't help but think about the book Paul and Stephen as well. Because in Paul and Stephen, there's one point that they're at Simon Peter's home. Or no, they're not in Simon Peter's home, excuse me. It's during a time where Saul has not converted yet, and they're being highly persecuted. And Simon is not filled with doubt, but he's thinking, he's like, I believe in the master. I know what he told us. We have faith. And why is all this persecution happening to us? And then he realizes it was spreading the news, because it was bringing all this attention to the community about, these Christians and their gospel and what they were doing, what they were spreading. And here too, Kardec points the same thing out, that even though these detractors, as he calls them, are kind of bad-mouthing Spiritism and slandering, in effect, it's spreading it. It's bringing the attention to other people. And so they're actually helping the cause. And so that had a deep effect on my heart, that we don't, and it brings it to our own lives, because we don't know how God is going to work in our lives. And we were always being reminded by Jesus to discern and to look for how our prayers are answered. It may not be in the form that we anticipate. It may not be in the form that we asked for, but it is always in the form that is best for us. So it's really, pushing us to expand ourselves and to get out of what I want and how I think it should be. And Kardec was such a great role model of this. He pressed on because he knew what he was doing was his mission, what he was assigned to do, and he kept true to it. So it's a very powerful message. And he points out, he says, okay, if this is wrong, go ahead and prove it. So they wanted to slander and criticize, but yet nobody was stepping up to the plate to say this theory is wrong because, or providing any kind of scientific proof. They were all coming with emotionalism of, we don't like this or we don't like that, and kind of mockery. But, they weren't stepping up with any hard, firm convictions or any evidence. So I think, it's a, he was a great role model for all of us about, being convicted, staying firm, and just keep on that path of good. Don't let these distractions, if they only become a thing or powerful if we let them. So.
It is so true, Theresa. And Kardec, as you're describing, was so courageous, right, at the time to press on and publish and truly study Spiritism and the phenomena, because it started with the phenomena, but he went beyond it. He really went deeper, and has, from Paul and Stephen, from the time of Jesus to us, all of us will face those detractors, right? Those that will come maybe in our families, maybe in our closest circle, but maybe completely distant, but still trying to, as you were saying, Theresa, bring arguments, but they are not based on the truth, right? Because Spiritism is the light of the truth, right? Brings us that truth, that science. Yeah. It's so interesting. And, as we're having this conversation, I know, Norah, that you are a teacher, right? And you are focused on learning and knowing that the importance of the learning process. And I thought it was interesting that Kardec says when we started in this, when he's talking about the detractors, he says that the overwhelming majority of Spiritism is composed of intelligent and studious persons. So saying, Spiritism is like, you really need to be willing to learn, right? You cannot just say, I'm Spiritism. So how does that speak to you, Norah, as an educator, knowing the importance of us learning and the importance of us studying Spiritism, right? Not just believing, because Spiritism comes as the light of the truth, saying it's the reason and faith. So we need to reason. It's not blind anymore, right? So how does that spoke to you when you read that?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. Thank you. And I kind of wrote that was one of my first point was, how is it that this makes sense? Like, I don't think Kardec was saying this to be presumptuous, like, oh my God. It has nothing to do that only educated, intelligent people, but it's like the habits of doing it. Because think about some of the things that we do, right? First, it's that exploration. So, as a student, we have to build sort of that capacity to be exploring. And another thing, when we have, when we love to read or study, right? We learn. We have that historical, cultural context around us, right? Because we're also in this living human experience. So, can we imagine a spiritist also bringing in those insights from our own learning, right, and our understanding? But I also think that something that was really like thinking, we always think, okay, intelligence, intelligence, it's all about learning, learning. But in this context of being a student and in Spiritism, it's also helping us build that ethic and moral development, right? That Kardec here is trying to sort of kind of, we as we delve into the other chapter, we see a lot of that science and the morality coming in together. But I also think that it's about spiritual growth. We need that too. And when we have, the this practice, this philosophy of individuals who sort of build these habits, and maybe each of us have our own, right? As we're all different kind of learners and students. When we all bring this to the table in Spiritism, right? That's how we sort of build, I guess, build upon it, and that progress, right? That Kardec is talking about here, right? And I also think, and I'm gonna just say it, it's being skeptic. We have to question. And I think that's a big, big thing.
Mhm.
I'm gonna leave it maybe to Teresa. She wants to add that, but I think part of becoming that is always asking, and I think that's what he's saying here. What that means is not that you have to be educated. It has nothing to do with it. It's about the habit of that. That's what I felt this means, and I tell my students this all the time. Right? Always be a student. So yeah. Sorry. I know. Like
Yeah.
Theresa, say something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want me to comment on that?
Yes, please, Theresa, of
I didn't know if
course.
you were going to present us with different questions.
Oh,
Uh,
sorry.
well, I think, what the comment when he makes this comment is composed of intelligent and studious persons. My take on this is that Spiritism is not imposed upon. So it's like the proof is in the pudding. And many people, I can't tell you how many people have said to me, I read No Solar and then they wanted more, you know? And so Spiritism sells itself. Again, the proof is in the pudding. So you don't need to have a PhD to understand it. It's a simple message. We can complicate things. We always can complicate things. But I think it speaks to the heart. It opens the heart. And it comes from the heart. So it's not like, and again, it doesn't impose. It doesn't say you must do this, or that to qualify. All is welcome. There's no dogma. in this.
Mhm.
So I think it's just that natural inclination that that people want more. And also, I think we should remember that at this time in the 1800s, this was a century where, the religions were kind of being capped and science was opening up. And so I think people were opening their minds to like consider other possibilities. And also I think, we are naturally evolving that we want to understand. We don't want to just believe because someone tells us to. So the idea of understanding and having a faith because it makes sense and we understand it and we believe it, not just because an outside force is imposing upon us. And then I think it's self-driven because there's no, again, there's just no authority hierarchy passing down the rules and regulations. So I think this is what Kardec is leaning toward. I don't think he's implying that there needs to be a certain title involved,
Exactly.
or a certain heart that is more wanting of this. Because people who accept, they kind of lazy, right? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Then I don't have to think. I don't have to apply any effort. You just tell me. Spiritism doesn't really work, right? Because we all know our evolution is an inside job. It's not something on the outside.
Yeah.
So again, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Theresa. I was just gonna
No, it's
say,
just right.
it as you're saying, it comes from the heart, right? Because we need to be open to learn. As we were created simple and ignorant, how are we gonna progress? As we're talking about the law of progress, right? We're gonna progress if we learn the new. And as you and Norah are saying, Kardec is pushing us and saying it's not a blind faith where you're gonna believe just to believe, but let's study, let's go deeper, and we need to really be open to understanding, right? And Vanessa is here and she's joining us. And thank you for being here, Vanessa. We are connected with you. Send you lots of love. And yes, evolution is an inside job for sure. It reminds me of that passage which is in the book of News, that Jesus is talking with Nicodemus, and Nicodemus has a doctor of the law. He told Jesus, I know the scriptures, I know everything, but why is it so hard? Why can I not apply? And Jesus told him, Nicodemus, you forgot to feel it. And when we talk about the heart, is that right? It's not just knowing to know, is knowing and feeling it, so that that can be translated from words, thoughts to actions, right? And feelings. So
Can I add something real quick? Because it also even reminded of Chico, right? Now, Chico Xavier is like that heart and that science, because if we really think about it, through him, there's a lot of documentation, right? There's a lot of evidence with all the cases, him as a medium, but also the heart component and everything that is in there, and all those examinations that have encouraged us today and continue to grow. So even today we have that, right? And it has nothing to do, like you said, Theresa, it's not about the education, it's about the heart. It's also about the evidence that is here. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
yeah. And you mentioned Chico Xavier, Norah, that brings me to the other highlight that I want to bring to Theresa and you, which it's still in talking about the powerlessness of the detractors. And Kardec says that, it's been known that new ideas that are called to revolutionize the world, they will run against obstacles. because they have to fight against the very self-interest, prejudice, and abuse that they have come to overthrow. So then it says it's part of God's plan, as we're talking, Theresa, about the law of progress, that, Spiritism comes to fight, and we know Spiritism comes to fight selfishness, right? It's in the Spirit's book. So it will, because it comes to fight selfishness, it will encounter those that because of selfishness, they don't want to accept it, right? What are you telling me now that I gonna reincarnate and, now everything I have, what does that mean, right? That doesn't mean in the spiritual realm, it doesn't mean anything, right? We're all equal. So people don't want to accept it, right? They don't want to accept that they will have to reincarnate in a different country, in a different family, in a different socioeconomic status, religion, but also the self-interest, right? How was it reading that for you, Theresa, and understanding from this aspect that Spiritism will face those challenges, but it's because it came to go to the core, as we're saying, to help us fight selfishness inside of us, right?
Right. And we know, right, from the Spirit's book that they do tell us the greatest obstacles is pride and selfishness. And so, and even today, back in the 1800s, even today, still today. And so what really came to my mind is this idea that we will not always be understood. And what do we do when people don't understand us? Sometimes silence is the best teacher, because to argue back and become defensive does not model selflessness, or right, and it's also can be filled with pride as well. So, just like Jesus said, those who have ears to hear will hear, and those who have eyes to see will see. But we should not, again, let these detractors allow us to, get stuck, or that because so-and-so doesn't believe, or this group of people, that we should allow this to, freeze us in our tracks. We should continue to do the good, because we're not doing this alone. We have assistance from the spiritual realm. And so, because after all, who am I? I'm someone who lives in Vermont, and there's not a Spiritist center. I think the closest Spiritist center is, like 4 hours away. Thank you, God, for technology. But, to lean in on the doctrine of faith. And so, just like I think it was St. Francis of Assisi who said, preach the gospel and use words if needed. So, it's really actions speak louder than words. So it's putting, what we preach into practice. And I wouldn't even say we preach it, but what we share, to put it into practice. And also to realize, just like Kardec, he was one of these skeptics at one time. Remember, he was invited many times to go to the seances, and he was like, oh, this stuff is crazy, not doing it, and the spirits they kept, putting other people in front of him to go. So, let us not forget, we need to remember, I was possibly in this person's place as well, that it didn't make sense to me, reincarnation, and why can't I come back as a grasshopper? And, to realize when people don't understand yet, that we should not lose hope or get discouraged or fall down into idleness, because all these things can happen. We can get depressed and say, just forget it, it's too overwhelming. But to remember to lean in on the doctrine, and first and foremost, we have assistance from the spiritual realm, and we will be guided. And if I'm filled with negativity, it will be hard for them to work with me. So it's always that working on oneself. It's not to focus on what other people don't understand. It's what do I don't understand. And so it's Spiritism is it's a constant striving, and that's really makes sense, because if someone passes to me a doctrine and says, do this and that, and you're finished, I know too much at this point. It's too good to be true. And not only that, it doesn't make sense to me, because everything in the universe is changing constantly. The universe is dynamic, and all we need to do is look to nature. It's constantly changing and growing, progressing. So we cannot, afford to think that we only need to do A, B, and C and we're finished. So, yeah, I think it's to put the practice of the gospel into effect is, how can I love more when I'm not understood, and to watch for my own pridefulness and selfishness in my response, and make sure that it is a response and not a reaction, right? Because again, the proof is in the pudding. So what is it I do? Okay, because actions speak louder than words. So it's all these maxims that we can come back to. Yes. So thank
As you're saying that, Theresa, we are living at a time, it was, making me think that people they don't want to talk about religion, right? You can say all different words, but when you say God, it's like you're saying a bad word, right? And people, don't want to go for it. And it's probably because we've been there, we've done that in other lives, right? Where it was, as you were saying, that faith that you have to do this, you cannot do that. So it was just, yes, no, yes, no. But Spiritism has the light of the truth to show to us, you have free will, you can choose, but if you choose this, there are consequences, and those consequences are going to stay with you, right? But it says, we are talking about, it all comes from not just words, but actually applying it to ourselves, right?
So true. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So as we move to this last part of today, which is when he start talking about the extraordinary and the supernatural. Kardec he's such a great educator, but also a great scientist, because he says from the beginning, right? An idea is superstitious only because it's erroneous. It ceases to be superstitious the moment it is recognized as the truth. And then later is that you cannot brand something superstitious until it can be proven that it does not, in fact, exist. And then he comes to says that Spiritism comes to destroy the things about the superficial ideas, and it really becomes to show the truth from what is wrong in our beliefs, and everything that is absurd about it. I thought it was so interesting because, right, Norah, when you say, "Oh, I'm Spiritism," people go straight to think like, "Oh, witches and the supernatural," right? And the extraordinary. But then he's saying it's actually not it. It's the opposite, right? Um, what were your thoughts, Norah, as you were reading that part?
And I think that's beautiful, because it kind of has to do too with the teacher part, right? I think what you're saying, it's this compatibility with that research and positivism, which is kind of like a time frame where a lot of this empirical evidence is important, and it's so opposite, like you said. It's not a cult. It's not all of this. If anything, it's building those critical thinking skills, having more observations, right? But also like having this compatibility with modern thought, being open. And I think another thing that Allan Kardec in this chapter 2 is trying to highlight as a teacher is finding that ground to integrate the science with the spirituality, and to sort of not be like in this, like if it's not possible. And there's I wrote some notes here, how we can sort of do be a better, not better spirits, but just be better students. How's that? Okay. One of the things that he says here is we need to study, like the discipline, right? Manual, right? um, Explore different perspectives. Again, the critical thinking, being mindful, engaging with others. And when we do these practices, we're kind of being part of that team too, to come and sort of tell the detractors, right, from distractors, sorry, from the other chapter, hey, it's not that, it's actually this. And that is a very modern thing. And I was thinking, like, wow, like he wrote this such long time, and that today we're able to sit here, and it's here, and there's a lot of new research, right? How, again, the science is, there is creativity in there, there is faith. It's a yes. Our dear sister Kara said, reason and faith side by side. Absolutely, it is possible, and so many people are doing it. I have a couple like professors, and I've talked about spiritism, and most of them are not open to it. But there was one that he was super open, and it was just so nice, right? Um, to bring in, I guess, all of that. Now that's why we sort of need to bring in, to normalize it. Like you said, Daisy, we're not normalizing anymore. Like, God, religion, spirituality, it's a bad thing, but it really
Mhm.
isn't. That's kind of what came to my mind. Thank you.
How about you, Theresa? Do you have anything you want to add on that note too?
Yeah, so it makes me think about the book Genesis, one of the codification books, and I believe that was the last of the books published. And where there's a whole section on miracles or phenomenon, and Kardec helps us to understand that the so-called miracles in the Bible were really not. They're of nature, but we just didn't understand them yet. And we haven't fully arrived, but we have a better sense of it from studying Spiritism. We can have a better understand of the invisible and things that are not apparent to our senses. However, that would have been too much of a jump at this time of, right, what is Spiritism, of this book of Kardec with this skeptic. That would have been too great of a jump. So what they were able to do was use their sensory of vision and say, through observation, we can witness this. And that was the science he was using, by observing and using reasoning and discernment. And so it helps us to remember, I think, especially from Genesis, that we should keep an open mind, because just because we don't understand something, we don't need to fall back to old conditionings and create superstition and woo the boogeyman and hell, and create all these really scary things to make people, to impose on them beliefs. That no, to instead to use our discernment and our free will, and to come to better understand how these things operate, instead of just assuming they're spooky and scary and let's create some story about them. But I think it's a lesson for all of us today to remember to keep our minds open. Now, this doesn't mean that, everything goes. No, we still use our reasoning and discernment. But if we close down and say, it's only this way, this is the way, this is, because even Kardec told us, if things arise as science finds new discoveries, follow the science. And we're not talking about jeopardized or hijacked science, because we know sometimes power and money comes into play and things can be promoted that are necessarily good and true. But the point is if when we close down, we we lay ourselves open to resorting back to old conditionings, because this is what happens, because then we go back to what we know is familiar. And what do we know is familiar? We know a lot of imposition. We know a lot of dogma. And this is, I mean, when we really look into the history of religion and it just even spirituality, you know, there's been millennial of conditionings. And so, you know, our spirits are still working through that. So I think Kardec is inviting us here to keep an open mind. And he invites even the skeptic. He says, okay, come on in and disprove, you know, I'm open. And I think all it takes is someone to attend a spiritist center to understand they're not even doing seances. They're not holding hands and trading.
No.
And, you know, this isn't even happening. And it was so beautiful when he gives the little description about the man sitting in a theater, the journalist sitting next to someone. He didn't realize he was a spiritist. And he says, oh, good, they're going to bring out the witch scene or whatever. Now I can write about spiritism. And the guy turns to him and says, I've been to many spiritist centers, and this isn't at all the truth. And so this is, again, when we make accusations and assumptions and it's hearsay. We have not even had the experience. So again, I think an open mind is really important, even with the material that we are presented in Spiritism. And frankly, that's what kept me going, because nobody was saying it has to be this way. But I was interested to learn more, like, oh, reincarnation. And so what does this mean? And becoming to understand it better, and how it made more sense that, in fact, I wasn't going to become a dog, or I wasn't going to come back, you know. I mean, the chances it could happen, but more than likely, I'm not going to come back in a remote town in Africa, you know, because there's this affinity and this memory we carry with us in our spiritual bodies. And to make sense of it, instead of concocting stories and then that just promote fear.
Yeah.
So open-mindedness is really, really important as we study Spiritism and practice Spiritism.
Yeah.
Because if we don't keep an open mind, it's hard to absorb the lessons from Spiritism that are really shedding light on the lessons from Jesus.
And as you're both saying, right, Spiritism truly comes and has also a science, and there's nothing supernatural about it, right? Nothing extraordinary. As you mentioned, Theresa, people think, oh, you go to a spiritist center, that would be, you know, something, and then, you know, come in, sit in a spiritist session, right? Watch and you can see. And then people think, oh, but reincarnation, I don't want to talk about reincarnation. Then just last week, in Vanessa brought to us in this program last week too, there was an article published in the Washington Post that was talking about children remembering past lives. And it was mentioning about Ian Stevenson's research at University of Virginia, now with Jimmy Tucker, that has scientific papers, scientific studies prove to us that reincarnation is not something, you know, extraordinary and supernatural, as Kardec's bringing to us here. It's a law of nature, is a law of ourselves. So it's, you know, Spiritism and science go hand in hand, right? There's no conflict anymore, right? Oh, you believe in God, but you also believe in science. No, they truly go hand in hand with one another.
Sure.
Right.
And, you know, Ian Stevenson, he practically did what Kardec did. He studied, he observed, he kept notes, he kept a lot of notes, and that carried weight as evidence toward his, you know, his theory. So again, you know, Kardec tells us it's a theory till it's disproven. And so, and there you have it. So it's a theory.
Exactly. And as you guys reminded us in the book, Kardec says, do you know, if you have questions, he's like, I'm not, with those that don't want to have a conversation, I'm not even going to go there. But those who really want to study and learn, he's saying, come on in. And, and that's how many of great spiritists out there became spiritists, because they were like, what is this? And then they start reading, right? Reminds me of Professor Euripides Barçanufo. It was one book that he received, and that book changed his life because he started reading it. And as you were saying, Theresa, you start going deeper, and now you want to know more, and you want to know more. And then when you least realize, you're like, okay, this completely makes sense. It's not a blind faith anymore.
Right. And it's a deep knowing. It's not I think or I believe or I'm part of this group, but it's a deep knowing inside of oneself. And, it just seems like history repeating itself all the time, right? Because we even look in Jesus's time with the Pharisees and the doctors of the law. They were so threatened by Jesus's gospel and his goodwill. Like, how was he helping these people? And, and they had to resort to, they're unclean and, going from these titles of, this is sacrilegious. You can't heal on the Sunday, never mind that he's helping someone to relieve their suffering. And it's just the same history repeating itself over and over and, giving us more opportunity to learn. And like you said early, Deise, this idea of kind of crushing our pride and selfishness.
Exactly. And Carol is also bringing to us and saying reincarnation is an act of love from God to each of us, as we are all given the opportunity to progress and redress previous choices. So true, right, friends? Reincarnation is truly an act of God, right? To think that we commit a mistake today and we're not doomed, right? That it's not the end. We can come and readdress it with others and if ourselves. That brings us so much hope, right, Norah?
And just sort of to add to it, thinking about this idea of like having like patience, right, for the process, because it can get very like, you just want to know, right? I'm like, I want to know why not, why we're not there yet, And it's so important, I think, just to be patient. Everything in God's time will come to, and I think for me, just like, okay, so how can I, get to that place, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about our actions and, keep studying, doing our God, a gospel at home, meditating, praying, finding spiritist centers online or in person would be ideal, right? But and doing other things like I have to look at my notes, because then I get off track. Hold on. Seeking support from the community. I was thinking about also like showing compassion towards ourselves in the process, because as as we're studying, we're kind of learning more. We're in this mindset that Kardec is trying to help us in this chapter. We could be discovering things, and we have to use that self compassion in the process and in the journey. And to be trusting of it, right? To know that things are, whether in the mindset of this chapter, even in life, or that things are not against us, but they're for us. And so for me, that was like, okay, just be patient. But the other time, I just wanted to know, like, I just want to know, I just want to know, I just want to know, and I'm like, and just that right there, just set back that impatient thing. Okay, just read a little bit more and ask the mentors. They're going to help you as we're studying, especially for those of us that are doing more at home, right? Um, Asking our mentors to help us build these practices and these habits that Kardec is outlining to us in this chapter to become a little bit more every day more and more proficient. So thank you.
Mm.
Thank you, Norah. It's the journey, right? As you're describing to us, Norah. We're not gonna learn everything in one day, right? As you're saying, we need to truly take it in, continue studying, right? Um, don't give up because we'll read and become discouraged. Some people become discouraged, right? Because I'm not there yet, and there's so much for us to learn, but it's a learning process, right? So as we get to the end of this part here, I want to bring the last highlight for us to comment. And we're gonna do a round, and as we reflect on this, I would love to hear also from both of you. Um, you know, as we learn. So let me first read what Kardec says, because he says that he's talking about spiritism, that it broadened the realm of science, as we're talking here, that spiritism is a science. And in doing so, it became a science on itself. However, because the discovery of this new law has entailed moral consequences, the codification of such consequence makes it at the same time a philosophical doctrine. So we know that Spiritism is a science, but also a philosophy. That's what Kardec brought to us. So has Spiritists in the US, right? For those who are joining us, who are getting to know about Spiritism, that are getting to know about Kardec and this works, what are your words for them as we think about Spiritism? Has this philosophy that comes to go at the core, as we talk throughout this program, right? To change our values, or to go at the core of ourselves, but also as science, meaning it's not blind. There we come to study to understand the reasons why, not believe just to believe. How has this been in your journey, and in your words for others who are going on this journey of studying Spiritism, in having these conversations with detractors? And sometimes the detractors is ourselves, right? Because we ourselves will be having these conversations, right, with ourselves. Um, what are some of your final words as we start to wrap up? Um, I don't know, Theresa, you want to start, and then we'll go to Norah.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, what comes to mind for me is the lesson that Emmanuel has given us about we fly by two wings. And that is one of wisdom and knowledge, as well as charity, which is basically love. Charity is love, love is charity, in its true sense of the word. So we're talking moral charity. And so what I've come to learn in studying Spiritism is, because when I first heard that, I thought, oh, so I got to get, I just need to study, and I like to learn. So let me learn everything I can learn. And then I understood more that what do I do with this knowledge? So really it's about becoming wise, which, I'm not poo-pooing traditional academic studies, Norah, calm down. But I think that's a part of it. It is a part of it, of course. But it's also, what do I do with this wisdom? Do I just keep it in my head? Do I pass it through my heart? And in doing so, then I come to understand it's how do I help somebody else? And it's also coming to recognize, I think, for me, that it doesn't mean that I'm going to have this beautiful, shiny life, no problems, no worries. In fact, sometimes I have found the opposite. But it is coming to recognize this with a different sense about it, because we start studying all these laws, moral laws, and get a better understanding. and realize, that the body is a filter for the spirit. So what an opportunity for this illness. What an opportunity to expunge it, right? What an opportunity for this situation that I really am angry, and how do I navigate through this using these two wings, because if I'm only reactive and defensive and be, more angry, I'm going to fly lopsided. I'm not going to fly very straight. So it's not a once and done deal. It's an ongoing with each situation. But I think for me, just to keep it that simple, because if I start like rattling off laws and, question number, blah, 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 in the spirits book, that's still working up in here. But it's like to bring this down into my heart. And I think really to kind of go back to the life of Jesus and, how did he live his life? Is a great role model, an example for me. So I think for me, this idea of philosophy and science and blending the two and making it practical and also functional to use it in my life, and that it really works. And it is hard when I come up against my own pride and my own selfishness. I just don't want to let go sometimes, but I know what relief is on the other side. And so it's about knowing yourself, right? Because if you take an inventory, you can remember those things that worked well and then those things that didn't. So thank you. I'm sorry if that was a a very long, lengthy.
No.
I think the two wings.
Yes, the two wings. Yes, and Jesus has our role model. It's so beautiful. How about you, Norah?
And it's beautiful that you asked this question, because when I did stop on that word. What does this philosophical implication mean? And in kind of talking with my mentor here, something came to my mind. Think about it, how you can be helpful in your community, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the actions. And I wrote a couple of steps down. Like, one of the things to be in part of this is the education and awareness. Another one, to facilitate discussions like here at Kardec Radio. To also provide support and guidance to others, especially us that have a little bit more experience in spiritism, right? How can we do that? How can we help others promote kind of like critical thinking as we are in these study groups together? And this is how I learned. I would listen in the study groups, and then I was like, oh, this is how you think. And little by little, gaining that independence. Um, to emphasize the positive action, to foster community engagement. But I think one of the most beautiful things of this philosophical implications that we're learning is to lead by example, try our best. And when we become these role models, us here, then the others can also observe us. And I think that will be something that will help. I'm going to use the word promote, because it really is, right? We're trying to, hey, I experienced something amazing, right? It's kind of like, yeah, like you go to a restaurant and you taste this amazing thing, and we have, give it 5 stars, we give it the rating and try it out, right? I think taking that approach to in spiritism, being mindful of respecting, but we don't have to even say anything. It's kind of like what he's saying. It becomes philosophical, as somebody put it there, because it becomes an action. So that's kind of to wrap up. Thank you.
Oh, beautiful. Yes. Jesus has our model in leading by example and putting our knowledge into actions. Thank you both for summarizing this so well, and thank you for being here as we learn together, as we learn with Kardec. As we said, there's so much for us to learn, and it's so good to be together in this beautiful community through Kardec Radio, to be able to learn it and learn it with Kardec. So thank you both. I know we're gonna stay connected here at Kardec Radio. I also want to thank everyone who joined. Marco Davids, Kristen Santos, John DeRosa, Slavic, our dear Vanessa, Carol, Robbie Brown, and so many others which we might not be able to see. Thanks for joining us. Also, those who watch us on demand. We are here learning together in this beautiful community. So thank you, friends. There will be a beautiful other program here. Yes, Puritans, help us obtain more from this opportunity. So beautiful, Robbie. Thank you so much. And we'll be together here next week for another What is Spiritism program as Kardec continues going on. And next week starts on the opposition of science. So a lot for us to learn. Thank you both for joining us, and stay connected here because Kardec Radio, we're always nourishing our souls.
For sure.
Thank you, Theresa. Thank you, Norah.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.